Hi there, Math 126 fans. I just went through all the homework leading up to exam one this summer, 2025, and I grabbed every question that I recognized as something I had asked on an old exam before. And when I write exams, I go through the homework. I always grab a few things directly from the homework, and then I always make up a few things that are similar to the homework. So everything I do is based out of the homework. I feel like that's fair in the sense that you have all seen those problems, so if there's a wording confusion, you've had to already encounter it. But what I've noticed recently, especially in the last 10 years, is sometimes if I take a question directly from the homework, I'll have students ask during the test, so I'll say, I have no idea what this wording means. So there's something going on, a disconnect. And I think it's because homework has so many ways you can get help and resources, you can get this false sense of understanding. So that's something you can prepare for. So I would suggest that part of your study, one of the first things you do, is flip through the homework. You don't have to redo all the homework, but flip through and say, could I start this? I don't want to be surprised by this. So I'm going to help you do that here. Okay, and you can find more advice on my website, but I'm going to get rid of this here. Okay, so I've collected kind of a random assortment. I'm not saying these are the ones that we have. These are just ones that, on a quick glance, I know I've asked before. So I know I've asked this on an old final, and this was from one of your homework sets. So would I know how to do this? Find the equation of a sphere. This is just to help build your confidence. Would you know the first step? Or would you have to look something up? If you're having to spend a lot of time looking something up for a question you already did, then that's no good. That's too much time. So this is a good thing you can do so if you weren't already doing this, as you're doing the homework, you can say, could I do that on a test? Could I do that one on a test? When you finish a homework assignment, you can take 5 minutes and flip through and say, which of these would I not know how to start? That's the goal of the homework, is to get to where you know how to start all the problems without thinking. Okay, when does it intersect the XY plane? I know I've asked that on an old final. You have to plug in 0 here and simplify to make sure that it actually intersects. So we don't want this to be something that's taking a long time for us to do. Okay, so I'm going to kind of play this game and show you some problems. I'm not going to work out everyone. That's not the point of this. The point is, if there's anything in what I'm about to do that completely shocks you, then that means you missed that when you're doing the homework. These are all straight from the homework, and it's very likely that I'll ask some of these things on the test. You don't want to be shocked. Okay, so let's kind of grab an assortment. We're just going to play the game of, would you know how to start? Or would you I sometimes have students that say, oh, I knew that was in the homework, but I was completely lost during the test. So we'd like to think about, what could you write? I'm never trying to trick you on an exam. The questions will be the same skills used in the homework, but there's a lot of different skills, so it's good to make sure you know how to start. Find the equation of a sphere. So if I was a student, there's no way that I would leave this blank. I would already be filling this in. And I remember, I think last quarter I asked a question like this, and a bunch of students were like, I don't understand what you mean by diameter. I don't understand what you mean by these are the endpoints. So students were wasting time on the exam asking questions that they really would have already had to consider when they were doing the homework. I hope this makes the homework more real for you. So I know there are tons of ways to get help and do these problems, but that then steals your chance to know it for the test. And so that's kind of a choice you make. So this is the one where you had to find the midpoint between those two. I remember students saying, well, I don't remember you ever giving us a midpoint for them. I had students come to me after the test really angry. And I was like, well, you had to somehow figure it out on the homework. So that's why I thought it was fair. But whether it's fair or not, that's not the debate I want to have with students, because you take the same exam as your classmates. So that's not really a good argument, and I'm not trying to trick anybody. So I want to avoid as much as possible these lashing out or blaming the test. And just the best thing to do would be to prepare and do well. Okay, then you had to get the radius, so you needed the distance from 2, 4, 7. And I'm just talking in general to there. That was your radius, you were done. So I'm telling you that last quarter, 5-10% of the students had no idea how to do that problem, and that was directly from an old exam. So I don't want you to be in the same boat as them. Because students often tell me, well, the exams in the archive were easy, but the one I took was hard. People say that every quarter, so somebody's wrong. So let's keep going. So it just feels different. So I asked this once on an old exam. And I remember after the exam, I had 3 students email me in anger and said, "You never taught us what resultant force was." And I didn't get upset, because I don't get upset with students. I understand people are under stress and strain. But I was like, well, this is actually word for word from the homework. And so I felt like it was fair to ask, because you've encountered it before. So if the wording was confusing, the time to ask is during the homework. Okay, so that's the point. But this is the one where you had to give a vector for each one of these. You had to do a little bit of trig to find this. So this was 200 cosine of 60 degrees. 200. And we give partial credit. So the thing that really kills students is having no idea what to do. And you added those vectors together. You found the magnitude. Okay. So again, my main point is, would that problem have shocked you? I want you to have that experience now and not during the test. That's part of what I'm trying to do in the test preps. Okay, so let's keep going. I have a large collection of these, just questions I have grabbed from the homework that I know I've asked on old exams before. And I will do the same. On this exam, I will pick a few things directly from the homework. I feel like that's a good way to go. You then know some stuff is coming that you have seen before. So this was asked on my most recent exam. Angle of intersection. So this was a problem we did. This was 8x. I hope this is helpful to you. And I don't mean this to be negative. I just don't know how else to say this. I'd rather have these conversations now. You had to find when they intersected. They intersected at 2 places. And I remember some students having trouble solving this. And again, yeah, it might be hard to solve, but we've seen it before, right? So there were 2 answers. You plug at 0, that both of them had a slope of 0. So the interesting question was at 1. At 1, the slopes are 8. The slope of the first one is 8. And the slope of the second one is 12. So what we did, anytime we were asked for an angle, was we used our 10-star fact. So we want to already have this in our, there's going to be something that asks you for an angle. You want to know that's what you're going to be using. And here's one where we have to take a 2D slope and somehow turn it into a vector. And that's when we do this 1, 8. And I remember after the test, so many students came to me and said, "How did you know to use a 1? Why didn't we use something else?" And I was like, that was a big discussion we had back with 12.1, but also it's directly in the homework, so you had to encounter this before. And you say, well, no, I looked up some formula online, and that's how I figured that homework question out. Well, then that's no good, because so if you're doing the homework and you're having to look up something that that's not part of our course at all, then that should warn you, hey, you should come ask about it. All right, so this was this idea of we need something, anything, that has a slope of 8. And so the easiest choice would be 1a. You put those vectors together, you compute. Okay, done. So that's the game I'm trying to play here. So I found this one. I know I've asked this on an old test. Okay, that's directly from the homework. This is one of these where you write down your 10-star fact. I remember students saying, oh, this was confusing because you had to read the unit. And I was like, yes, it was, but it was a homework question. So this is about the angle between the vectors, thinking about how to see it. Okay, so that's the game we're going to play here. I'm going to try to go a little faster because I'm taking too long, but this is something you can do. Could I start that? Could I start that? And if it's something you don't know how to start in the homework, then add it to your note sheet. These are ones I know I've asked. Let me grab a few more of these. We can just work our way down. Find the angle to the nearest degree of these. I've asked that before on many old exams, and a lot of students have gotten it wrong because they didn't know the approach. So we're trying to get the angle at A, and I'm not trying to trick people when I do this stuff. So you know what's coming. You choose to get to prepare or not. You are taking the same exams as your classmates. So it's fair. It's better to not think about blaming the test. If that makes you feel better, that's fine. Whatever I can do to make you engage with your learning as much as possible. But I think if we can just say it's a challenge, I'm going to take it on. There's no reason to have anxiety. This is one course in Otherwise Happy Life. I just want you to show your understanding in as best a way you can. So you need to find two vectors that come out of A. We talked about that. You need to find AB. You need to find AC. And most students that get this wrong subtract in the wrong order. So I mentioned in class about how to check your work. And if I was doing a test, I would very carefully make sure I'm subtracting A from both points. I would line it up. And then I would put my other points in. So I have my B. And then you use your 10-star fact. So again, I'm grabbing things that I know I've asked before and I know students have got stuck on. So you keep playing this game. So don't just watch me. This is not a video to just watch. You should think and say, could I start this? Find a non-zero vector orthogonal to the plane. Oh, okay, that's a standard thing we've done a lot of, which is to find a vector that sticks out of a plane. So you have to find PQ by subtracting. You have to find PR by subtracting, and then you have to take their cross product. So that's a big skill. Find the area of the triangle. Well, that's 1/2 of the length of whatever that cross product is you just got. I think you did a couple of those in the homework. So I remember many times over the years, students just didn't subtract, and then it's hard to give them much credit. So this is where you say, do I know the first step? That's the way you prepare for an exam. You say, do I know the first step? Okay, how about this one? Find the equation of the plane. Oh, I've asked this lots of times on old exams, and it's been missed lots of times. Find the equation of a plane. Now, that's part of a big topic, but we have a strategy. We need a point, and we need a normal. And then you read, what did they give us? They gave us a point. So I don't think these are things where we stare at the page for a long time. I think these are things we would know right away if we prepared. So then we have this point, 3, 6, -2. You can see how I drew the picture. I always recommend you do. And we have this line that's on there. What can we say about the line? It points in the direction of -1 to -3. And now what do we need? So now we're stuck. We need a normal. They didn't give me a normal. So my goal is to find two vectors that are parallel to my plane. Well, I have one. I have this -1 to -3. And so you say to yourself, I need another vector that's parallel to my plane, and if I can find it, I'll take the cross product. Now, this is a tough question, but this one came up a couple times in homework, and if you look on old exams, it comes up quite a few times here. So now we're trying to figure out how to find another vector parallel to my plane. And one strategy is to see if you can find 3 points. And we actually don't need full 3 points, but because we already have one of the vectors. But one of the things hopefully you already would be doing is wanting to label at least 1 point on this line. So how about 4, -1, 0? That's what I get when I plug in t equals 0. Now I have 2 points, so I can find the vector between those 2 points. That gives me another vector on my plane. So you get 1. This is a bigger topic. That's why I spent a little more time here. I subtracted incorrectly. So -1 minus 6 is -7. Cross product, and I'm done. So to me, that's probably page 2 of the test, but I have a big practice sheet on that. And that is, to me, the biggest challenge, thought-provoking thing on the test. Find the equation of the plane that's the intersection of, the equation of the line that's the intersection of those 2 planes. We've done that quite a few times. You should know that your strategy is to try to find 2 points. Combine, find 2 points, and then you're done. Okay, so lines and planes definitely should be a place of study, but that you can study a lot in old exams. And there's one of these that says basically give the name or match the graph. So would you have a plan of attack here? Would you know that it's kind of weird to have 2 minuses, so I really would like to multiply everything by -1, and then I have 1 negative. The traces are hyperbola circle, but this is a negative, so this is a hyperboloid. 2 sheets. So how did you do that on the homework? These are all homework questions. And how would you have a plan of attack for doing it on an exam? That's the game we're playing. Okay, there's this one that was on the homework. Find the equation of the circle with all points for which the distance from the points. So I remember on the test, people were like, I had no idea how to start this. So remember the idea was to label your unknown points and then write down this distance equals 3 times this distance. It's a full translation problem. And then you give a name. If you forgot those, you can make a note. This is the other thing that's happening when you're looking through homework is you're going to make a note of ones you don't know how to start. Sometimes people say, well, I don't know how to start any of them. Well, then that's something you should have been dealing with while you were doing the homework. Come in and ask us. Visit the lab. Hopefully, as you did the homework, many of the questions, when you look at them again, you know how to do. If you're looking back at the homework and you don't know how to do any of them, then you didn't approach the homework the right way the first go around. And you need to make some adjustments moving forward. Because when you finish a homework set, you want to be able to look back and say, I know how to start all these. Okay? This one, do I know how to start? It's an intersection. X is sine. Y is cosine. Z is t. Combine, solve for t. So really, the nice part about preparing for an exam is things should start to come into focus, and there should be nothing that you have no idea how to start. Give a vector function that parameterizes this. Okay, we're looking for something that works. Oh, hey, there's a circle, so I can do 5 cosine of t, 5 sine of t, and I need to figure out what z is, but it's the product of these two. So it's 25 cosine sine. I'm sure this video is getting too long, but I hope this, if things like this are of value to you, please let me know. I'm exploring, but taking a lot of time to do it. Okay, what about this? Find the tangent line. I've asked a lot on every single one of my old exams, and it's something people always miss. So you need to go through and say, would I know how to do this? I need a point. I need a direction. This is going to be the point they already gave me, 5 log of 25, 1. But this needs to be the derivative. This needs to be r prime of whatever the t is. I talked in class about the biggest mistake students usually make is they don't know how to find t. But they're telling you how to find t. They're saying what t value makes this 1, this log of 25, and this 5. Well, there's only one that does that. T has to be 1. And so I need to take the derivative and plug in 1, and I will be done. That's a quick question. We don't want to be eating up time and brain cells on questions like that. This happened on one of the old tests. I grabbed this question, and there were 3 things to do. You had to integrate this, you had to integrate this, and you had to integrate this. And I remember after that test that some students were mad. They were like, oh, I didn't put the integration by parts formula in my test. That was unfair. I was like, well, it's directly from your homework, so I thought it's fair game. So I just want you to get, I'm not trying to be mean here, I'm trying to get the perspective. If I ask you something directly from the homework, it's fair game. Okay, integration by parts. I'm going to make this u, I'm going to make this dv, and see what happens. And that's a small thing. Like, even if you forgot the integration by parts formula, you still could get a very high grade on this test. It would just be one small thing you missed. But why miss it? Shove those two together, use your initial condition. This initial condition is saying that when you plug in 0, all 3 of them need to be 1. You do have to actually plug it in, so if you've forgotten that. Okay. What are some other things? We've hit most of the topics already. This one says these 2 things intersect, find the angle of intersection. Okay, we just have been doing lots of that. We're going to use the 10-star fact about the angles between things. You're going to have to compute some derivatives. All right, let's keep looking. This is stuff from 13.3, so at the time of me making this video, we haven't covered this, but this is an arc length question. And so we know how it's going to go once we've learned the arc length. The integral from something to something of the square root. And so this is a parameterization question. the origin to here. So you're going to have to come up with a parameterization of this so that you can compute these derivatives. So maybe you want x to be t. So if x is t, then y has to be 1/2 t squared, and z has to be 1/3 of whatever x times t is, 1/2 t to the third. Compute those derivatives, plug them in, and you're off to the races. Compute the curvature. That's a straight formula question. We'll talk about the curvature formula in the next section. Maximum curvature. Okay, this is a little bit tougher curvature question. Okay, so at this point, we've now run through every question I could find that I've asked before in the homework. Now, that I may grab a different homework question, and not every question will be word for word from the homework, but quite a few will be. And by knowing the homework well, you will do well on a large chunk of the exam questions. Okay, I hope that sort of helped. I just wanted to give that perspective because I think that it's easy to get this false sense. So if any of those questions I just went through you were completely flabbergasted by or never had thought of before, then you have to think about how you're approaching the homework. All right, I hope that's helpful.